We have a shocking trade update for the New York Islanders as things are getting concerning when it comes to Islanders trade rumors as Alexander Romanov's name keeps on getting thrown around. And what's even more concerning is the teams that seem to be inquiring about Romanov are exactly the type of teams that you don't want to trade a player like this to. We're going to break it all down on this episode of Islanders Digest and really talk about how likely I think it is that Alex Romanov does get traded this offseason and whether or not it makes sense for the Islanders at all. Before we get into that, we noticed that 65% of you who watch these videos have not yet subscribed to the channel. So if you're an Islander fan, you want more Islanders content just like this, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button. It's free. Now let's get right into talking about trading Alex Romanov. And I'm going to come out and say it right away. I don't think this makes a lot of sense. I know, especially considering the Islanders are expected to draft Matthew Schaefer in this draft. There's talk about how they have a logjam at left-hand defense, and I do see that it makes sense for the Islanders to move a left-hand defenseman. Absolutely not. It should not be Alexander Romanov. Now, we've talked about him in previous trade videos, and I do think for the right price, the Islanders should consider moving this player. If they get an offer, they can't refuse, especially considering that defense is going to be so hard to find in this offseason. I mean, we talked about how hard it's going to be to find centers in this offseason and why that gives JG Pageau so much value. Well, when it comes to defense, there is even less pickings and even more teams who are desperate to improve their defense. So I do think if a team is willing to overpay for Romanov, or the Islanders are able to get something that is so valuable that they can't say no, I do think you have to consider. I don't think any player for the Islanders should be untouchable, but the way that he's being thrown around in all these Islanders trade rumors is very concerning. And in this recent rumor, this is from the Hockey News, the talk is about the Philadelphia Flyers, and this actually comes from RG Media, which is a pretty reputable source. I think Stefan Rosner actually just signed a contract with them, so he's actually writing for the articles for the Islanders on that platform, which is great. Love Stefan Rosner, and he provides the best coverage for the Islanders, so good to see that he's getting another gig. But in terms of the Philadelphia Flyers being linked to Romanov, it makes a ton of sense from a Philadelphia perspective. This is a team that, according to many reports, no longer wants to be in the bottom of the division. They are attempting to take steps to be more competitive. And in terms of the Islanders potentially trying to get a high draft pick this season, that's actually something that is pretty intriguing. But in terms of trading them Romanov to help them improve, does not make really any sense from an Islanders perspective, in my opinion. Yes, I totally agree that he'd be a great fit for Philadelphia. And let me know if you're a Philadelphia Flyers fan in the comments below. What do you think about Alex Romanov and what you think you'd be willing to give up? Because, again, I do think there are certain deals you do make for Romanov, as we're going to talk about towards the end of this video. But when you list all the things that Romanov is, his age, how effective he has been, and just look at his stats for the Islanders these past 3 seasons, he's taken a step forward each and every year, which also tells me, even though he is now 25, I don't think we've seen the prime of Romanov yet. He showed this year that he has a bit more of an offensive flair, not quite shown in the stats, but the Islanders were terrible offensively all year. His underlying numbers on offense are getting better every single season, and defensively, he's so reliable. And on top of everything else, we always talk about how, a lot in the comments, there is some concern amongst fans about how the Islanders are not as physical as they used to be. Well, the most physical player on this team is Alexander Romanov, and the last thing you really want to do is trade him to Philadelphia and then see him 4 times a year. And just looking at the stats, this is a player that you keep. Now, it's going to be expensive for the Islanders to sign him on a long-term extension, which is something we're going to talk about right now. But I think that price for Romanov, based on what he did last year, really stepping up at points and being the Islanders' #1 defenseman, when realistically, that should not have been his role. That should have been either Adam Pelech's role or Noah Dobson's role, but neither one of them stepped up. Romanov did, and when he was healthy, he played really strong hockey for this Islanders team. And as a result, he is going to get a pay raise, which is partially one of the reasons why people are talking about trading him. Still, from all we've heard so far, it seems like Alex Romanov is asking for $5 or $6 million. And I'd say, considering what he put up, I know the points are not huge, but considering everything he did for this team defensively and really providing energy in big hits, defending Islanders player, I think that's worth every penny of a $5 million contract, especially if we're not going too long-term. With a player like Romanov, you do have to be a little careful because the way they play, you love the physicality, the blocking shots, but sometimes that leads to you not lasting as long as other players. But if you can get a 5-year, $5 million contract for Romanov, and I think that's a fair offer, I don't think you should trade this player, especially not to the Flyers. And this article talks, and it talks about the assets the Islanders are getting back in return. It talks about the Islanders being desperate for additional future pieces in the form of the Flyers have a ton of really late first-round picks and second-round picks, especially in this draft. For some reason, the Flyers decide to really bulk up on this draft, which does not make a ton of sense considering it is a weaker draft than previous seasons. No, I think it's getting overhyped how weak this draft is. I think there's plenty of good talents available, but this idea, there's some validity to the point where I don't think this draft is as deep as previous seasons, and the Flyers having a bunch of late first-round picks. This article talks about how those could be valuable to the Islanders because they need a ton of assets, and to that, I personally disagree, especially with the Islanders. While they don't have as many prospects as other teams, they have the first overall pick. They're going to be adding Mathew Barzal, and right there, they're going to have a top 10, 15 prospect pool in the NHL. In addition, the Islanders do have a second round pick in this draft and 2 firsts in next year's draft. So this idea that the Islanders are desperate for future assets in the later rounds, in the later parts of the first round, just does not make sense to me. And I think if the Islanders trade Romanov for a late first round pick or 2 late first round picks or a first round pick or something like that with like later picks, I think that's a huge mistake for the New York Islanders. Even if you do want to get back into this year's first round, I think you try to move a player like Pelech or even package your second and third round pick in this year's draft to move up. You do not trade Romanov. I understand why the Flyers would try to make this deal, and somewhere around the league, I'm sure the Flyers will find, perhaps not as young, but a defenseman like Romanov that they can acquire for a first. But it should not be Romanov. If they want to talk about Adam Pelech, which I know that doesn't make sense for the Flyers, but if a team like the Flyers, say like the Nashville Predators, wants to talk about an Adam Pelech, potentially give a 26 overall pick or something like that, then I'm all ears. But for Romanov, I don't think that makes sense. Trading a player like that for a later first-round pick, not only does it not make sense, it's more than the Islanders paid for Romanov, giving a 13th overall pick. And for the record, I was skeptical of that trade at the time. I actually think the Islanders did pretty well with that trade, especially considering they were contending right there. I know it is a lot to give up for Romanov, but I think that was a good trade. It doesn't make sense to the Islanders to move this player just to free up a little cap space or anything like that. Romanov is the type of player that you want to be spending that cap space on. And with players like Pajot that can be moved, I don't think a move like that makes sense. Now, I will say there is a scenario where a Romanov trade does make some sense for the New York Islanders if they can pull it off. And we've been talking about it a lot on this channel about what are the Islanders' odds at acquiring James Hagens. I don't know what the odds are for that. That really depends on how aggressive the Islanders are going to be. There are definitely different routes they can take to acquire this player. And one of them definitely is, especially considering that the Bruins and the Flyers are both interested in, now this is the article from RG Media, since the Bruins and the Flyers both are interested in Romanov, there's a potential where if you make a package with him as the centerpiece that you could potentially pry away a 6th or 7th overall pick, and you would wait in the draft until you knew James Hagens was still available. And that is definitely an option the Islanders can take. Based on the fact the Flyers and Bruins are both looking to trade up in this draft is a pretty good sign that they are not interested in selecting James Hagens, especially considering that he's expected to be available around this area. And I think for a player like James Hagens, while there are some teams who are not that interested, there are some teams who still think he's one of the best players in the draft. And just based on the fact the Islanders interviewed him with and had a meal with him, and they only had dinner with 2 other players, being Schaefer and Misa, I do think the Islanders value him a lot. So if you can use Romanov in a package to bring in a player that you believe is going to be your franchise center for the next 10 or 15 years, then I understand why you make that trade, and I accept it. But I don't really think it makes sense for the Islanders to make that trade if it's really any other asset, unless you're getting something either like the 7th overall pick where you can draft James Hagens, assume that he is available at that time, or maybe if you're going for a player like JJ Peterka, which the Islanders have been linked to, and we're going to be talking about, if not later today, tomorrow. I think we also have to talk about, there is a rumor that Dobson wants $11 million on his next contract, so I think that's what we'll be focusing on thanite in a video. Romanov, unless there is a crazy offer like we're talking about now, if Dobson's asking for potentially $11 million, which is absolutely ridiculous. I can't rant on that right now. It's ridiculous. Say if Romanov is asking for, say, $7-8 million, then I think it makes sense to move on from him, because clearly that is not a good deal. But if it's true that he only wants $5-6 million on a 5-6 year term, I think the Islanders absolutely should hold on to this player, and it would be a mistake to let him go unless something incredible comes in the trade market. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Do you want the Islanders to shop Romanov, or do you think he should be untouchable? Love to know your thoughts. I know they were pretty heated in yesterday's video, and I love having hockey discussions with you guys in the comments below. As always, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan. Catch you on the next episode of Islanders Digest, probably later tonight. Let's go, Islanders.